It was one of those quiet mornings when the world feels like it's holding its breath, the kind of silence that makes you listen closer to everything inside your own mind. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, staring at the screen that blinked a small notification, one new voicemail. I hadn't heard from him in months. Not a text, not a call, nothing. Just silence that stretched longer than I thought possible. And yet, here was a message waiting, like a ghost from a past I wasn't sure I was ready to revisit. My fingers trembled as I pressed play. The room around me seemed to fade, and all I could hear was his voice, soft, hesitant, broken. Demet, he said my name like it was the only word he had left, the last lifeline tossed across an ocean of mistakes and silence. He told me he knew I wouldn't answer, but he needed to say things he hadn't before. Things about love, regret, and goodbyes. It's strange how a voice, just a voice, can pull you back into memories you thought you buried deep. That voicemail wasn't just a message. It was an unraveling of years, of laughter and fights, of sunrises watched together and nights spent apart. I remember every word, every pause, every crack in his voice. Before that voicemail, our story had begun with a spark. It was an ordinary rainy day on set, nothing cinematic about it, but the moment he looked at me and said, "You're freezing," I felt something shift. From then on, he was there, always watching, always near, turning ordinary moments into memories. We laughed, we fought, we loved recklessly in front of the cameras, trying to keep the parts of us that were real hidden from the world. But love isn't always enough. Over time, the pressures grew. The silence grew heavier. The smiles we gave the cameras were masks for the cracks forming underneath. We drifted in the same bed, strangers wearing familiar faces. And that voicemail was the echo of a love that fought to survive but finally let go. Hearing his voice that night broke me open and made me whole again. It was a reminder that love doesn't always end with a bang, sometimes it's a whisper. A confession. A goodbye. And even now, years later, I still remember every word he said. The morning air was thick with a quiet I hadn't felt in years. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest and refuses to let go. I remember sitting there with the phone balanced precariously between my ear and my shoulder, the tiny speaker crackling as his voice spilled out like a fragile secret, Demet. The name alone opened a floodgate of memories, of laughter that echoed through empty rooms, stolen moments beneath the city lights, and whispered promises that felt like they could never break. But they did break. Slowly. Quietly. Like a glass slipping from your fingers and shattering before you can catch it. Before the voicemail, before the silence between us became unbearable, there was that first rain-soaked day on set. I remember the cold droplets sliding down my face, the muddle of voices shouting directions, and him, arriving late but somehow commanding the room without trying. His leather jacket dried despite the downpour, his smile teasing yet sincere as he said, "You're freezing." I hadn't known him then. I thought he was just another actor, passing through. But in his eyes, I saw a spark, a warmth that challenged the chill biting through my hoodie. That moment sparked something neither of us expected. A connection that grew not from grand gestures but from the quiet understanding that maybe, just maybe, we could be something real amidst the chaos. Days blurred into weeks as we navigated the pressures of work and public scrutiny. Between takes, our stolen glances grew longer, our touches more deliberate. I still remember how he would bring me coffee just the way I liked it. Black with a single sugar, even on the busiest days. How he'd quote lines from our script to make me laugh when stress weighed too heavily on my shoulders. We weren't trying to fall in love. At least, I told myself that. But love found its way in the small moments, the way his hand brushed mine accidentally, how his eyes softened when he thought I wasn't looking, the way time seemed to pause whenever we were near. Yet, as quickly as love blossomed, shadows crept in. The world around us was loud, unforgiving, and constantly watching. Cameras didn't just capture our smiles, they captured every sigh, every hesitation. And the pressure to be perfect strained the fragile threads holding us together. It started small. Missed calls. Texts left unread. The space between us grew in silence, not screams. I remember the nights lying awake beside him, feeling the cold distance like a physical barrier. We were two people sharing a bed but worlds apart. One night, after a particularly exhausting day, I asked him, "Are we okay?" He just said, "I'm tired," the word heavy and hollow. That tiredness wasn't about sleep. It was about us, about everything we'd lost without even realizing it. The man who once held my hand like it was the most precious thing in the world now barely touched me at all. The fights that followed weren't dramatic explosions. They were quiet withdrawals, unspoken resentments, and the slow erosion of trust. We kept pretending, for the cameras, for our fans, for ourselves, that everything was fine. But it wasn't. Eventually, the distance became unbearable. He left. Not with a bang, but with silence. And then came the voicemail. I remember it wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them, the trembling pauses, the fragile apologies, the love and regret interwoven with every syllable. "I'm sorry," he said. "For leaving the way I did. For the things I didn't say. For being too proud." Hearing his voice again after all that silence was like waking up from a nightmare only to realize it wasn't over yet. It was raw. Honest. Heartbreaking. He talked about the balcony, the night we stayed outside to watch the sunrise despite the cold. How I had leaned on him, trusting him with everything I was. That memory, once so full of hope, now felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my heart. "I love you," he said, even when I wasn't brave enough to say it. And then, the word that still haunts me. Goodbye. After that message, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was filled with echoes. Memories that wouldn't fade. A love that refused to die quietly. I deleted the voicemail, but I never deleted the memory. Because some voices don't fade. Some words stay with you forever. Even now, years later, I still hear him. Still feel the weight of those final words. Still remember every breath, every pause, every tear. Love, I've learned, isn't always about holding on. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to let go. And even in letting go, some part of us holds on, quietly, gently, endlessly. After that voicemail, my world didn't suddenly fall apart, it quietly shifted on its axis. The days that followed were a strange mix of numbness and clarity, like walking through a fog but suddenly noticing the light filtering through the trees. I went about my routine, work, interviews, meetings, but every moment felt heavier, charged with a silent question, what now? I kept reaching for my phone as if expecting to hear his voice again, maybe a follow-up call or a simple, "Are you okay?" But there was nothing. Just the ghost of that message lingering in the empty spaces between my thoughts. At night, I would lie awake, tracing the invisible lines where he used to be beside me. The mattress felt too big, the silence too loud. I remember one particularly cold night when the wind howled outside, and I wrapped myself in his old hoodie, the one he forgot to bring back. It still smelled faintly like him, like rain and cigarettes and that inexplicable warmth I thought I'd lost forever. I wondered if he was doing the same, if he was wrapped in memories, haunted by the same ghosts. I tried to make sense of it all. The love, the fights, the silence, the goodbye. Was it pride? Fear? Or just the cruel passage of time? In those moments, I realized that love isn't always about dramatic declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes, love is the quiet understanding that two people, no matter how deeply connected, can grow apart. That sometimes, the hardest act of love is to say goodbye without anger, without bitterness, just with a broken, trembling hope that the other person finds peace. I started writing again after months of silence. Pen on paper became my therapy. I poured every fragment of pain, every shard of memory into words. Letters I never sent. Conversations that never happened. It helped me stitch the pieces back together, even if the fabric was forever changed. Friends noticed the change. They told me I looked tired, distant. But they didn't see the battles raging inside me. The nights I cried silently, the days I smiled to convince myself I was healing. And healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt free, like I could finally breathe without the weight of his absence crushing me. Other days, I was lost, trapped in the echo of his voice, the shadow of his goodbye. But slowly, very slowly, I began to understand something important. That voice message, as painful as it was also a gift. It was proof that love had been real. That it had mattered. That even in the silence, we weren't truly gone from each other's lives. I carry that with me now, not as a wound, but as a story. A story of two souls who collided, burned bright, and parted with grace. A story of love that wasn't perfect, but was deeply human. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is still and the past feels close enough to touch, I whisper back to that voicemail. I say, I hear you. I still remember. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Time passed, slowly but relentlessly, like the gentle erosion of a river shaping the rocks beneath. I found myself caught between the past and the future, clinging to memories while trying to step into the unknown. Every day was a balancing act, between holding on and letting go. I remember walking through the streets of Istanbul, feeling the city alive yet somehow distant. The bustling crowds, the sounds, the smells, they all reminded me of moments with him. The laughter echoing in cozy cafes, the shared glances under neon lights, the quiet conversations that felt like secrets whispered just for us. But now, those places were just markers on a map of a life I used to live. A life that had changed irrevocably. Sometimes, I would find myself staring at my reflection, searching for the girl I was before. The girl who believed in forever, who wore her heart on her sleeve, who thought love could conquer all. She was still there, somewhere beneath the layers of heartbreak and healing, waiting to be found. I realized healing wasn't about forgetting him. It was about embracing the parts of me that had grown through the pain. About learning to love myself as fiercely as I had loved him. About writing new chapters while cherishing the ones already written. There were nights when I cried, not out of sorrow, but because I was proud. Proud of surviving, of moving forward, of carrying love without being broken by it. I learned that love leaves imprints, not just on our hearts, but on our souls. And some imprints never fade, they shape us, remind us of who we are and what we're capable of. I don't know if he ever thinks of me. If he still hears my name whispered on the wind or feels the ghost of my touch in quiet moments. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. What matters is that I still remember. Not with bitterness or regret, but with gratitude. For the love we shared. For the lessons learned. For the strength found in goodbye. I still remember every word he said in that voicemail. And in those words, I find a piece of peace. Because love, true love, is never really gone. It just changes form. It becomes a part of who we are. And that, Kanka, is a story worth remembering. And so, here I am, still standing, still breathing, still carrying the echo of his voice in my heart. That voicemail wasn't just a message, it was a goodbye wrapped in love, a fragile bridge between what was and what will never be again. I've learned that sometimes the most powerful love stories aren't the ones that last forever, but the ones that leave a mark deep enough to change who you are. He was my beginning and my end. The voice that haunted my nights and the memory that warmed my days. And even though we walked away from each other, a part of us will always remain intertwined in that fragile space between love and loss. Every word he said in that voicemail is etched into my soul, a reminder that love, no matter how fleeting, is always worth holding on to. Because in the end, love isn't about possession or forever. It's about the moments that take your breath away, the memories that shape your journey, and the courage to say goodbye with grace. I still remember every word he said in that voicemail. And that memory is my strength.